मम्मी आना पड़ेगा कमरे में मेरे, जल्दी आ जाओ चुपचाप, ड्रामे मत पापा। मम्मी आ जाओ जल्दी से। अपने कपड़े वगैरह लेके आ जाओ, रजाई भी, शालू मम्मी की रजाई भी दे देना। तो अम्मा से दूर रहो।
नमो रमना।
पता ही नहीं, मैं पता लग जाएगा। वॉइस तो मैंने फंक्शन
Anurag, we need the audio, dear. We don't have the audio. Anurag?
Ma'am, I've already told Narayanji and Rajesh.
Okay, okay.
द्वारा कामेश्वर प्रीत्यत्वम सुबह सोमने मूर्ते आद्य
शुरू हो गया राजेश?
कलशस्य मुखे विष्णु कंठे रुद्र समाचरत मूले तत्र सिद्धितो ब्रह्मा माति मातृगण समुद्रा कुशब्द सागरा सर्वे शब्द भाव समुद्रा वेदो यजुर्वेदो देव पूजार्थम दुर्गा शकारका बंबुरा सागरोत्पन्नो विष्णुनाथ विष्णु करे देवेश पूजने स्वामी नमोस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रोक्तो जीव देवस्कारण अंधार निर्मालयं स्वयं गौरे पूजे ओम चक्रमणां प्रसक्तिता योग विदात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रगतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिपूर्णाय नमः अनंताय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रहेभ्यो नमः दशदिक्पालेभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य श्री प्राणस्थानस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वर ऋषिरेकि सामधर्माणि संधांति सकल जगत्स्थिति सम्मानकाराणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति रोम कीलकम प्राण प्रतिष्ठापने वियोग आम अनुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं दर्शनीभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः व्याप्यां नमः हरिं कनिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः ओम प्रदर्शिताभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा ओम सिद्धाय वसन् आम कौशायं हरिं नेत्रदाय वसन् ओम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व स्वरूपी दिग्बंध ध्यानं गंधां बोधिस्त बोधोरस कर्मस्वर कराचे तासं बोधनं निक्षुप्तं मणिमणमन्तं समाला विप्राण सुखवारं तनेन सिद्धा पिनवसोरोटिया देवी बाला गहना बहुमुखी प्राण शक्ति ओम हरिं रोम रोम हरिं हम यम रम लम वंशं संह वंश सोहम सोमंश अस्यामुतौ विबद्धश्चतो अस्यामुतौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्स सस्वत्र जीवा प्राणवा पाणिवाद आयुष्टानि या कस्ति कस्ति सुखं सुखं दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा वो मत्स्य श्री प्राणदृष्टा मंदस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वर ऋषिरेकि सामधर्माणि संधांति सकल जगत्स्थिति सम्मार्गाणि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजं हरिं शक्ति रोम कीलकं प्राण प्रतिष्ठापने विनियोग आम अंकुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं गर्दिनीभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभ्याभ्यां नमः हरिं वंशिकाभ्यां नमः रोम कर्णविष्ठाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा रोम सिद्धाय वसन् हम कौशायं हरिं नेत्रदाय वसन् रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्व स्वरूपी दिग्बंध अश्विनीले पुनर्स्नान देवलोकम जोपस्य में सूर्यपुत्र मर्मवे मर्यादिशक्ति आवायुदो भव सद्दांतो भव सन्नीतो भव सन्नीतो भव अवगुंडितो भव सुप्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामी सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् उदावसानकम् तावद्ध्वं प्रतिभावेन बिंबेर्बिन सन्निधं गुरु। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुशेलाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री कुबेराय नमः। तुमनो दिवंतन पौलस्य पत्रपा लक्ष्मी प्रसन्नानंद प्रिय ईश्वरा। ओम भूर्भुवस्सुः वसुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। देवी सविता विश्व सत्यपूर्णेन प्रसन्नामि अमृतं स्वाहा। ओम प्राणे स्वाहा। ओम आवारे स्वाहा। ओम ज्ञाने स्वाहा। ओम उदाने स्वाहा। ओम समाने स्वाहा। ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। दादी संकल्प निवेद्य समर्पयामि। देव देवालयं समर्पयामि। अमृतपुत्रं चित्रावतं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनमण्डलम् अस्मदीयं समर्पयामि। हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम। अष्टोत्तर बोलते हैं। अष्टोत्तर बोल देते हैं। श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात परम ब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। हमारे सिद्धुवारी दाशौर्य शौर्य मात्रम भुवनत्तमस्तम वायुदं तत्रं ब्रह्मवीरं चिन्ताविनं निर्विद्यामि। ओम महातेन महोतेन जाताय नमः। ओम श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम गुरवे नमः। ओम अखंड संविदागराय नमः। ओम बहुजसे नमः। ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः। ओम जगत्पितावताराय नमः। ओम श्री भूमिनाथाय ज्योतिदाय नमः। ओम पराशर कुलोत्तमाय नमः। ओम सुंदरात्मकफलाय नमः। ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः। ओम सयायाम्बा सयायते नमः। ओम शोणासुरमोहिन मानसाय नमः। ओम स्वर्णस्तगाय नमः। ओम श्रीमद्वादशात महास्तरे रक्त विद्योदयाय नमः। ओम महाशक्तिनिवादेन प्रवृत्ताय नमः। ओम परमात्मने नमः। ओम दिव्याय नमः। ओम पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः। ओम हिंदुमोहिना पितृपदे नमः। ओम पितृदेशत सोणशैल प्राप्ताय नमः। ओम तपोमयाय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम महायोगिने नमः। ओम महोत्साहाय नमः। ओम कुशाग्रदिये नमः। ओम शांत संकल्प संप्रभाय नमः। ओम सुसुयुक्ते नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय नमः। ओम तपस्वीन सर्वंगाय नमः। ओम कुल्लाकूल विलोचनाय नमः। ओम चंद्रिका सुधा मंडितानि मंडलाय नमः। ओम सूदवाक्यां समासीनाय नमः। ओम सूर्यदाग्र विप्रमाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांतमत्पन्नाय नमः। ओम सुमुत्रिणे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः। ओम विरूपाक्षवासाय नमः। ओम विराजन सलामुदिये नमः। ओम चित्ते नयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम रसिदाचलकांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। ओम दक्षिणात्मनिवाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ओम स्वराजे नमः। ओम महर्षिये नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम दीव्याय नमः। ओम भूम विद्या विशारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ओम आप्ताय नमः। ओम रुद्रमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः। ओम समत्रुषे नमः। ओम सत्यत्रुषे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः, ओम प्रसादाय नमः, ओम अमुद विक्रमाय नमः, ओम सुकुमाराय नमः, ओम सदानंदाय नमः, ओम मृदुवासने नमः, ओम दयानवाय नमः, ओम श्री सोनासुर युगूल स्कंदासुर निकेतनाय नमः, ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेशकरे नमः, ओम सद्भक्त वृंद परिपूजाय नमः, ओम गणेश मुनि प्रियेन सेविताय नमः, ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि वृंद संसिद्ध सत्याय नमः, ओम वर्णासन मदादीदाय नमः, ओम रसज्ञाय नमः, ओम सौव्याय नमः, ओम आत्ममदे नमः, ओम सर्वावरी मदस्ताना महाराज्ञाय नमः, ओम सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः, ओम आत्मारामाय नमः, ओम महाभागाय नमः, ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः, ओम विनदाय नमः, ओम विनुदाय नमः, ओम इंद्राय नमः, ओम मुनिंद्राय नमः, ओम बाबभोजबलाय नमः, ओम दर्शनादक सम्मानने नमः, ओम मौले रश्मात्म बोधकाय नमः, ओम नित्याति कर्षादित्याय नमः, ओम प्रणाद बंध मोचकाय नमः, ओम अंधस्मीर चंडांशवे नमः, ओम संसारारंभ कारकाय नमः, ओम सोनादि आदित्रे नमः, ओम आत्मविद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः, ओम अविच्युत निजं प्रज्ञाय नमः, ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः, ओम कमंडलुराय नमः, ओम सुब्रगोवी नमस्नाय नमः, ओम युवाय नमः, ओम दंडवाणिये नमः, ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः, ओम भवरोग पिशंबराय नमः, ओम स्कंदाय नमः, ओम देवदमाय नमः, ओम अमर्तयाय नमः, ओम सेनान्ये नमः, ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः, ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। हरि ओम, हरि ओम, हरि ओम। I will recite Upadesh Saram. श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परम ब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। कर्तुराज्ञया प्रापदे फलं कर्म किंबरं कर्म तज्जडं कीर्तिमाददौ अदन कारणं फलमशाश्वतं जगनिरोधकम् ईश्वरार्पितं नित्ययाकृतं चित्तबोधकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवामन आर्यमुत्तमं भूजनं जग चिन्तनं ब्रह्मा जगदीश्वरी युगसेवयम् अष्टमूर्तिभृ देवपूजनम् उत्तमस्तवा दुत्यमन्तवे सिद्धजं जग ज्ञानमुदमम् अद्यधारया श्रोतसाधमम् सरलचिन्तनम् विरलदपरम् वेदभावना सौभवित्यसौ भावनाभिधा भावविस्मदा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुद्धमा इरुस्तले मन स्वस्थता प्रिया भक्तियोग बोधाच निश्चितम् वायुरोदना दीयते मन ज्ञानभक्षिव रोधसाधनम् चित्तवायव सिद्धियानुगा सागयोद्वै शक्ति लय विनाशने उभयरोदने नयनदं भवदिनोदं प्राणबन्धन दीनमानसं एकचिन्तना नासमे जग दष्टमांसो निष्ठयोगिन नित्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यमानिदं नित्यमात्मनः स्वदर्शनं मानसं दुगिन् मार्गणे कृते दैव मानसं मार्गाचवा मृत्ययस्त्वं विद्ययो मनो विद्यां मन अमयं बुधो
क्या हुआ? है मास्क वो रखा ऊपर।
विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणदीपम नामदेतस तच्चणं सत्त्वभासिता चित्तवेदना सत्तयायिकी चित्तयाय ईसदीमयो वेशदीपिता सत्स्वभावो वस्तुकेवलं वेश आनद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईसदर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपक आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठा ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनति ज्ञानमस्ति ज्ञानमन्तरम् किं स्वरूपमि आत्मदर्शने अव्ययामवा मूलसिद्धम् बन्धं यदि संवरं सुखं वित्तदीयति देवस्तुदैविक अहमवेदनं निजविमाननं महतितं तमो रमणवाक्यम् अहमवेदनं निजविमाननं महतितं तमो रमणवाक्यम् महतितं तमो रमणवाक्यम् महतितं तमो रमणवाक्यम् अरुणाचल शिवराय नमः हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम।
All right. Narayanji, thank you so much. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanya. On behalf of Raman Kendra, I am very happy to invite and welcome all of you. We are very happy and privileged to have with us Mr. David Godman. Most of us know him and have read his works already, but just as a matter of brief formal introduction. Mr. Godman is very well known already among Bhagwan's devotees, as he has spent most of the last 40 years in Tiruvannamalai practicing Bhagwan's teachings and writing about him. He is a former editor of The Mountain Path and has edited Be As You Are, one of the most widely read presentations of Sri Ramana's teachings. As for Raman Kendra Delhi, he is also a regular contributor to the journal Direct Path. Mr. David Godman has all the questions sent out by the devotees. I would now request him to take over, and he will himself read out the questions and respond to the devotees. Mr. Godman.
Thank you for inviting me. I should explain that when I accepted this invitation, I was living in my home in Tiruvannamalai, not planning to go anywhere, do anything because of COVID restrictions, but an opportunity arose for me to go to Australia to be reunited with my wife, whom I haven't seen since last February. So I'm now sitting in a hotel on the 6th floor of a government quarantine hotel in Perth. I'm not allowed out of the door for 2 weeks until I've passed 2 COVID tests. So that explains the background. And I say this in advance because I'm dependent on the hotel's internet connection. So I hope it manages. If it doesn't, I have a hotspot backup. So if it suddenly declines, I'll switch to the other one and we can carry on. So I've looked at the first page and I'm going to cover some of the questions on this first page. And the first one is from Gita Ravichandran, who said, Bhagavan often said that the deep sleep state indicates that you are neither the body nor the mind, but the one without upadis. Is it possible to have conscious awareness in the deep sleep state? If so, how? Well, the clear and obvious answer to that is yes, because that's the state that Bhagavan spent his entire life in. And he was always insistent that he wasn't some kind of special being who had access to some secret knowledge, some secret experience that was not available to the rest of us. He said, this is your natural state. Also, this is who you truly are. You simply refuse to register the direct experience, which will give you this conscious awareness during sleep because your attention is elsewhere. Before I go into this, I want to tell a few stories about Bhagavan and his sleep, because I think they show what a remarkable difference there is between someone who has this conscious awareness and someone who pretends they don't. Major Chadwick was once talking to Bhagavan about sleep and said, are you really aware, fully conscious while you sleep? And Bhagavan said, yes, of course. And then Chadwick said, but we hear you snoring. Why are you snoring? To which Bhagavan replied, I enjoy snoring. I'm aware of the snoring. If I didn't enjoy the snoring, then I wouldn't do it. I'd stop. So this indicates some kind of full consciousness, full knowledge that Bhagavan was absorbed in, was abiding in, whether his body was in a state of wakefulness, sleeping, dreaming. He knew who he was at all times. And if during his deep sleep, apparent deep sleep states, the body was snoring away, he was aware of it and felt that if he wanted to stop it, he could stop it any time. Now, from the mid-1920s till the mid-1940s, he lived in the Old Hall. And what was absolutely remarkable about the way Bhagavan lived is that the doors of the Old Hall never closed. The only time that Bhagavan was alone, or rather behind the locked door, was when he went to the bathroom. At all other times, he was accessible, including at 2, 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, when it appeared that his body was fast asleep. If devotees, for any particular reason, felt an urgent need to go and sit with Bhagavan if they had some problem and just felt that sitting in his presence or asking a question might be advantageous, then they would creep very quietly into the hall and sit. And Bhagavan knew. He would be reclining on his bed. He never lay down flat. This is something Kanji Swami pointed out. He said, nobody ever saw Bhagavan lie flat. Even when he was apparently asleep, he'd only half recline. So you could walk into the Old Hall, tiptoe in, sit very quietly. Bhagavan would open his eyes, he knew you'd come in, and he'd look at you as if to say, I'm here, what do you need? How can I help you? So there was somehow an awareness of what was going on around him, devotees' needs, that even when his body was in a state of apparent deep sleep, he could be aware of people coming into the hall and could address and deal with those problems at any hour of the day or night. Oh, and Kanji Swami, not Kanji Swami, other people have said, but you close your eyes, you go to sleep, you snore like everybody else. And he said there are eyelids, there are muscles in the eyelids. He said muscles get tired. He said you can't jog all day, you can't walk all day, your leg muscles get tired. He said similarly, the muscles in the eyelids, they can't stay open all the time. Once in a while, you have to let them drop and then they recover and then you can open them again and carry on. So he didn't say that his closed eyelids or his snoring or anything else was indicative of a state in which he'd lost consciousness. They were simply body functions. Now, I was in Lucknow in the 1990s and used to have breakfast with Papaji there. And we were a group of foreigners with foreign habits, foreign ways of greeting him every morning. So he would come out from his bedroom and he'd sit down for breakfast and somebody would say, did you sleep well, Papaji? And he always looked slightly perplexed by this and occasionally irritated. And after some time, he said, why do you keep asking me this question? I haven't slept for 60 years. Stop asking me this question. I don't sleep at all. The jnani doesn't go into sleep. He doesn't come out of sleep. He abides as the self. The states of sleeping and dreaming might come and go, but he doesn't identify with the one who sleeps. So that's a pointless question. You can't ask that question of a jnani. It's not relevant because he doesn't have the same frame of reference that we do. For him, there is, we call it jnana drishti. It's the sight, the vision, the perspective of knowing oneself, of being jnana. And in that state, sleep, waking, dreaming may come and go, but you're not identified with them. You don't own them. You don't say, I am dreaming, I am awake, I am asleep. You know yourself to be self, and like clouds scudding across the sky, you see these states come and go. When they're there, you're aware of them. When they're not there, they're absent, but all the time your self-awareness is continuous. So a little time after I'd been there, I'd been doing some work for the Mountain Path, and I compiled a little collection of quotes on sleep, all about it, and gave it to Ganeshan to put in the Mountain Path. And there was one in which Bhagavan said, sleep is for the one who says, I have awoken from sleep. So Papaji just happened to be reading that while I was sitting him, and he absolutely loved that quote. He read it out 3 times, he savored it, he rolled it on his tongue, and he said, this is the statement of a true jnani. Only a jnani can say this. The point of this question is, of this statement is, you can only say I slept if there's a person who identifies with the 3 states of consciousness. You say, I'm awake, I'm in the waking state, I dream. When the I thought goes into hibernation and you're not aware of anything, then you say, I slept. And when morning comes round again, the phase change, the transition from sleep to waking up, you say, I woke up. And Bhagavan said, that's because we all identify with, oh dear, I have a unstable connection sign. I'll keep talking for the moment. Bhagavan said that's because the locus of our exist is inside the body. We exist as a person, we collect information about the world, we think about it, we experience it, we feel it, and we say, I think, I feel, I experience, I perceive, and all of these activities, we then quite literally invent a central coordinating entity that we call I, and Bhagavan would call it the I thought, that takes ownership of all these moment-to-moment perceptions, ideas, feelings, and experiences, and that somehow solidifies in us the absolutely unshakable notion that we exist as a person in a body, and that during the waking state, there is an I inside it, and we call that the real world. then we go off and have a dream and we think, well, that's not quite as real as the waking state. And at nighttime, this idea that the I only exists by knowing something, seeing something, feeling something. So even in that deep sleep state, when the self, it's almost like it's outside trying to get in, saying, this is who I am, this is who you are. And we refuse to recognize it, experience it, taste it, because we're so conditioned to have all of our activities through the medium of an intermediary we call I. You can't get that self-experience so long as this mediating I is there, wanting to have it as an experience. So in deep sleep, the I is in a state of hibernation, but it has no capacity to register or directly experience that self as it really is, because we're still brainwashed into thinking self is something I must experience, self itself is something I must know and perceive. And so we just say, I knew nothing, I saw nothing, I felt nothing. When we wake up, there's a vague feeling of, well, that was nice, that was quiet, that was peaceful. And Bhagavan said, well, that's who you really are. But you're so stubborn, even when these intimations of reality are sort of at your gate, saying, this is you, this is me, this is who you really are. You can't accept it because your brain is absolutely conditioned into only accepting things as real if they can be modulated, experienced, mediated through this intermediary thing called I. Now, sorry if I'm going on about this. This is something I decided to talk about today, even though it's question one. When you have this state of being and knowing the self, your relationship to the other states changes. If you think I am a person who exists, lives and moves inside the body, you have a hierarchy of knowledge, experience. You say, I am a real person, I live in a real body, in a real world. When I go to bed at night, there's a dream world. I can see that's still me in the dream world, creating dream pictures, enjoying my dream world. And at night, the I just goes to sleep into hibernation. So there's a hierarchy of states, phases, and you always regard the waking state as being the true one, the real one. The dream state you kind of own, but it's more of a projected imaginary world. And the sleep state, you concede it's you, but you don't know anything about it. Bhagavan and other jnanis say that from the perspective of the self, which is the only true perspective, there is no difference between the waking state and the dream state, except for the amount of time that they last. This is quite perverse to people who think reality is the waking state and that dreams are a kind of fantasy, imaginary projection. And I think from what Bhagavan has said, that if you are a jnani, if you're in this state, then you genuinely can't tell the difference between the waking state and the dream state. It's not that one is, but of course you say they're both unreal, genuinely can't say I'm dreaming or I'm awake. Somehow these experiences for them are so equivalent that they can't actually say which is which. And this is why Bhagavan says, from the perspective of jnana, both states are identical except for the amount of time they last. Now, this comment intrigued me no end. And the reason I've told this story is that I spoke to two of the teachers I've been with, who both, in my opinion, realized the self with Bhagavan. I asked Lakshmana Swami once when I was with him, and I said, right now you're sitting in front of me giving satsang. And I gave this quote, which Bhagavan had given on many occasions: there's no difference between the waking and dream states except for the amount of time they last. And I said, if really you have no faculty, no way of determining which is which, right now, how can you tell whether you're talking to me in your dream state or whether you're talking to me in your waking state. I was, I won't say making fun, but just, it was an unserious question. I wasn't expecting a serious answer. And he surprised me by looking very pensive, very serious for a while. And then he said, you know, sometimes it's really difficult. If I ever can't decide whether I'm awake or dreaming, he said, I bang my head on the nearest hard object. And if I wake up, I know I've been dreaming. And if I don't, then I'm awake. So this made me think, well, what Bhagavan said is fundamentally correct. There's something about the state of jnana that really gets rid of the I experiencing reality through the medium of a body and a mind to a point where you really are in this state of pure knowledge in which every other state is somehow ephemeral and indistinguishable. So many years later, I asked the same question to Papaji, and I said, right now you're sitting in satsang. How do you know whether or not you're having a dream satsang? Are you in the dream state giving satsang, or are you in the waking state giving satsang? And he gave a more philosophical answer and said, I'm neither in the dream state nor the waking state. Those states are in me. Which I thought that was a very neat, elegant way of, the jnani only ever knows himself to be consciousness. The states of waking, dreaming, sleeping, they may come and go as appearances in that self. He never identifies with them. He never thinks one is more real than another. He knows they're all unreal. And oddly enough, he can't even tell which state is which, whether he's waking or dreaming, that they're all somehow distant, ephemeral states. There's a story that Kanji Swami told, dating from, I think, the earliest days of Ramanashram. A Malayalam man had come and written the first biography of Bhagavan, and Bhagavan out made some corrections, gave it back and said, very good. So people were very much intrigued by this because no one had written a biography at that point, but the only person who could speak and read Malayalam at that point was Kanji Swami. So they were all eagerly waiting for him to return from whatever little pilgrimage he'd gone on. So when he came back, this manuscript was shown to him, and he read it with incredulous horror. He said the man who had written it was a railway clerk from Kerala who was married with 5 children, and his biography of Bhagavan had made Bhagavan a railway clerk from Kerala with 5 children. It was a complete fantasy. It was a complete projection. There wasn't a single fact in there that was true. It was just this man imagining he was a great guru and projecting his own insignificant little life onto Bhagavan. And Kanji Swami got quite upset and said, how could you correct this, give it back and say, very good? It's completely untrue. To which Bhagavan waved at the world in front of him and said, it's as true and as real as all this in front of me. So that there's something about being in the self that allows you to dismiss everything that's an appearance in that self as not merely unreal, but having an equal unreality as all the other appearances. So I go back to the original question. Possible to have this conscious experience? Of course it is. Bhagavan did. He showed us how to do it. And how to do it, that's the subject of the next question. But one interesting thing that Bhagavan said, I think to Maurice Friedman in Maharshi's Gospel, he was talking about the I as it existed in the waking state, the dream state, the sleeping state, and as different states. And Bhagavan said, just attend to it in the waking state. If you eliminate it in the waking state, you will find that it has ceased to exist in the dream and sleep state also. So this is a very long-winded answer how to experience full consciousness in the sleep state, the answer is eradicate the I thought in the waking state, and then you will discover there is no I thought in the dream state. And if the body decides to go to sleep at night, because there's no longer an individual I claiming ownership of all the body's activities and thoughts, there will be a full consciousness that's there all night while the body sleeps. And in the morning, the body will wake up, but you, the self, will be the same. So that was a long story. The next question is the one underneath. How does one kill the ego? Excuse me, I've had a little note saying my internet's not very good. So if you give me a couple of minutes, I'll just switch. Am I back? Can somebody tell me if I'm back or not? Can anybody? Okay.
Yes, you're
Yes,
fine.
okay. Sorry. I hope
Raise your hand.
that most of that didn't go missing. I'm now on the next question. How does one kill the ego? But first of all, I'm going to take exception to the verb. Kill makes it sound like you've been possessed by some kind of demon, some monster, some alien has invaded you that you have to be very aggressive and violent with, that you somehow have to execute it to reach or discover some better state. But this is the classic story of the snake and the rope. You don't run after the imaginary snake and beat it. You simply correct your perception, you correct your notion that there is an individual person occupying a body. And once that notion is gone, then the ego is dead. It's permanently eradicated. So you're not really going into battle to kill anything. You're simply changing your idea about who you are. And the way to do this, Bhagavan always said, he said there are two direct paths to do this, self-inquiry and unconditional surrender. Now this is very well known, but one thing I want to expound on a little bit here, because I don't think it's given enough coverage in stories about Bhagavan's life, biographies, that he did both. We all tend to give a quick summary of how Bhagavan got enlightened by summarizing the self-realization experience he had in Madurai when he was 16. But before that, there was an incredible, intense attraction to Arunachala. This is something that Bhagavan said many times in his written works, and I think it was Rangan, one of his schoolboy friends, when Rangan came to stay, I think Virupaksha cave, Bhagavan casually remarked, well, while we were all playing together as boys, your focus was on the game. He said, mine wasn't. Arunachala was pulling me inside and making me be so quiet I couldn't pay attention to your games. So this is something that, excuse me, I was lost. There you are. This is something I wish people had asked Bhagavan about. He was quite happy to write about this in his writings, but except for odd, stray, casual remarks, such as the one he made to Rangan, it's not something that's ever stressed or given a lot of importance. Which verse is it? 102nd verse of Aksharamanamalai. He said, Arunachala, the moment I thought of you, Arunachala, I was caught in the trap of your grace. Can the net of your grace ever fail? So there was this knowledge, this feeling when he was a boy that Arunachala was divine. This internal power was pulling him into itself and giving him these amazing experiences of silence and peace way before he had his self-realization experience in Madurai. So I want to illustrate this by going through Arunachala Ashtakam, just the first bit, because he talks about all this quite clearly and explains what happened. So it starts off by saying that there you are, Arunachala, looking like an ordinary inert piece of rock. You work in mysterious ways beyond human understanding. But then he said, from an age before I had any rational, logical thought, the immensity of Arunachala was shining in my awareness. That is to say, nobody told him about this. This wasn't the family deity. He wasn't given information about this. He didn't read about it. Arunachala, in some direct, unmediated way, made itself known to him, pulled him into itself, and put him in these deep and profound states of silence. So when he was a child, he just knew this word Arunachala. He was thinking about it, I think not as a concept. He just accepted this was a name for the divine, and he let the divine wash over him and put him into these states of silence. When he was about 12 or 13, one of his relatives came back from Tiruvannamalai, and Ramana was somewhat astonished to discover that, I'm getting little text notes, he was told that it was a real place and that you could visit it on a train. He said he was slightly deflated because he'd thought it was some imaginary great realm in the sky that he could go to and experience God. But then the devotion came back again. So as the verse continued, he said, I came to Tiruvannamalai, even though I came to know it was Tiruvannamalai, that was from the visit by his relative, still I did not understand its true meaning. But then I came close, then I came near, referring to his pilgrimage to Arunachala, and I saw it was Achala. Now that's a lovely word at the end of the verse. Achala means mountain, and Achala also means stillness, motionless. So this verse is ostensibly talking about his childhood, how the thought of Arunachala grabbed him at a very early age, that his relative told him it was a place that could be visited. But then he said he came to Tiruvannamalai, and only at that moment, he appreciated that he'd come to a mountain of stillness, a state of stillness, and that his journey was over. I think this verse, you can read it on two levels. You can read it as a description of the pilgrimage, the sadhana, the practice, the journey, which culminated in him arriving at Tiruvannamalai. But you can also see it as, is it a metaphor? Is that the right word? He's actually talking about his inner journey. He's talking about the eye going back into the heart, Arunachala, and becoming suddenly aware of the true nature of that heart as Achala, as silence, as motionlessness. And then the very first line of the next verse, the way the Tamil is constructed, the next line refers back to, I saw that it was Achala. So it's explaining how he got to this state of stillness. And it says, and this is the only time Bhagavan ever wrote about his self-realization experience. He said, inquiring in myself, who is the one who sees, I saw that seer disappearing, leaving that which is always there. No thought arose to say, I see. How then could the thought arise to say, I do not see? So here are the two facets, the two prongs of his approach to liberation. He had this spontaneous, automatic love and surrender to the mountain of Arunachala. It somehow purified him, gave him the grace, so that at the age of 16, he was able to ask himself, who am I? Who is the one who sees? And as a result of that inquiry, as a result of the grace and power of Arunachala, which had been bubbling away in him for years, the I went back to its source and definitively died. And from that moment on, it never functioned in him again. I tell people about this and they say, oh, there's no, this is a very different story. Why didn't Bhagavan mention that the thought of Arunachala was bringing about his realization? This doesn't come up in talks, letters, day by day. I will agree it doesn't, but in his written works, it's all over the place. There's the famous old saying, by seeing Chidambaram, by being born into Varal, by dying in Kasi, or by merely thinking of Arunachala, one will surely attain liberation. And he added to that a statement from Arunachala Mahatmyam. He said, self-realization, something that cannot be attained normally without great difficulty, can easily be attained by anyone who sees the form of this hill from wherever it is visible. And then he adds, or someone who even thinks about it from a long way away. Now, these are not his own sentiments, but when he came to write his own verses, there are several instances in which he quite clearly says that the thought of Arunachala has the power to enlighten. And not only that, he concedes that in his own case, this was the primary cause of his liberation. At the beginning of Collected Works, there's a little sloka, a kind of benedictory sloka that says, this is Arunachala Shiva, the ocean of grace that bestows liberation when thought of. And of course, there's the famous first verse of Aksharamanamala, you root out the ego of those who think of you in the heart as Arunachala. These are sprinkled all over the place. And how it worked in his own particular case, he says quite clearly in the Paticam, he said, I have seen a truly wonderful thing, a magnetic mountain that compels the soul, that attracts it forcibly. It stopped the activities of the soul of those who think of it even once. And then interestingly, he says, drawing it in to face itself. So if you imagine you're looking outwards towards the world, somehow Arunachala is pulling you from the inside. And then the moment you feel that pull, you turn 180 degrees and Arunachala recognizes your surrender, it recognizes your devotion. You stop looking outside and you're now looking inside. And at that moment, Bhagavan said, it makes you motionless like itself. This is Achala coming back again. The Achala of Arunachala turned Bhagavan to face itself, himself. And then Bhagavan said, it fed on me. It fed upon that pure, sweet, ripened soul. So Bhagavan's soul turned around, faced Arunachala, his guru, and somehow Arunachala consumed him and destroyed him. But there was the obvious outer cause of asking inquiry, but I think that it was his surrender, it was his love, it was his devotion to Arunachala, all done spontaneously, not through any active effort, that made him so ready, so pure and ready, as the verse says, that he was able to turn to face Arunachala in the heart, and Arunachala gobbled him up and destroyed him. And then he ends that verse by saying, how wonderful this is. You individual souls, you people, you yourself, be saved by thinking of this great mountain, Arunachala, because it shines in the mind as the destroyer of the ego. So here is Bhagavan categorically, repeatedly saying that the thought of Arunachala was the, if you like, the long-term proximate cause of his own liberation. So that the question was how to kill the ego. And as I said, Bhagavan said through surrender, through intense devotion that leads to surrender and then inquiry. And he said that because that's what happened in his own case. He felt the power of his own guru, his own God, when he was very small. It was there throughout his childhood. And when he reached the point of having a level of purity But Arunachala knew it could eat him up and destroy him completely. It made him aware of itself. Bhagavan turned to face his source, Arunachala the self, and Arunachala fed on his sweet soul and ate him, and he never came out again. Now, I think we'll all agree that we're not Bhagavans, that this isn't likely to happen to most of us. But as a blueprint, as a template for how to kill the ego, I think Bhagavan has given the perfect route map. Have love, have devotion, surrender to whatever form of the divine you feel most attracted to, whatever pulls you in, whatever makes you go inside with love at the thought of God. Allow intense devotion, that surrender, to whittle down, abrade your ego, your sense of individuality. Simultaneously, do your inquiry, and at some point, the conjunction of your intense surrender, your intense devotion, and your inquiry will take you to the point where you can face the self, the source, Arunachala, and Arunachala will say you're ready and eat you up. Now, next question. There's two down at the bottom of the page. What role did predestination play in Bhagavan's teachings on self-inquiry? And another one is our day-to-day behavior and action predetermined? These are interesting questions that I get asked about a lot, because Bhagavan's teachings tend to defy common sense, so that the things that don't make sense tend to be the things that you get asked about the most. So I will give you what Bhagavan said, and then I will also digress a bit into a story that I'd like to share with you. But several times Bhagavan was asked, are all the activities that we do in this life predetermined? I think Devaraji Mudalia picked up a cup or a fan, I forget which. I think there are two instances. Somebody picks up a cup and says, is the picking up of this cup predetermined? And Bhagavan said yes. On another occasion, somebody waved a fan and asked the same question, and Bhagavan said yes. So he was quite firmly of the opinion that there is a sequence of activities that the body has to undergo, and that it's not changeable, it's part of a script. But that's the deterministic part. But he also said on several occasions that although the activities that the body undergoes are fixed and predetermined, what is not predetermined is that we identify with the body that's doing them, with the person inside the body who says, I am the agent, I am performing this action. So he seemed to think that on a moment-to-moment basis, at any time, whatever we're doing, it was always possible to withdraw from the feeling of I am doing this and settle that thought back into the self, and slowly get rid of the notion that I am the doer of this action. Bhagavan had I would call it a Saiva approach to karma. There's a very interesting, not analogy, a description. Up at Skandashram, somebody came to visit him, and he was asked about prarabdha karma, the idea that we're all issued with a script by God, and that we have to undergo this script, and it's not changeable. And Bhagavan, who liked all kinds of analogies that involve projections, slideshows, movies, he said, imagine that there's a man who makes his living showing slideshows in villages. He has a large storeroom full of slides in his house, and he gets an invitation to go to a particular village, and he has a projector that holds 36 slides. So he thinks about what slides might entertain the people in that village. So he takes them out of his storeroom, he fills his projector, then he goes off to that village and he shows those 36 slides in the order. So he said there is if you accept that you're a person living in a world, then there is a being who looks after it, who runs it, who makes the rules, who allocates karma to you. And we call him Ishvara. So he said, you have a vast storehouse, a warehouse of karma, out of which Ishvara, certain sequence of activities in the same way. The man showing the slides in the village will pick out a certain selection. He will put them in the projector, take them off to the village, make the show. And he said, that's your life. It's a sequence of activities given to you from the Ishvara, which have to be performed in a particular sequence. What Bhagavan said, and which is quite interesting from the Saiva perspective, he said God is not vengeful. He's not punishing you for past life indiscretions. He's not a stern schoolmaster out to punish you. God now looks at all the possibilities, the options, all the ways in which you might make spiritual progress, and he tries to assemble his sequence of slides, if you like. He puts all the actions, he gives you a designated script, but he does it with love and tries to give you something that will give you maximum benefit. He can't get rid of the karma, you have to experience it all, but he puts it in a particular way that he thinks you can make maximum spiritual progress. So I know Bhagavan liked imagery connected with projection. I think if he was alive today, I think he'd probably incorporate the analogy of a video game into his teaching. I think he was the first person to introduce cinema projection, to the point when old Shankaracharyas would come and say, what's this cinema analogy? I don't understand it. And he would explain it. And he even said once that had cinema projectors been around in Shankara's day, he would have used that as his primary analogy. He said you wouldn't have needed all the other analogies. The cinema projector covers everything. But I also think the video game is quite a good one for modern times. So Bhagavan said the world comes into existence, the power of the self, he acts on the vasanas. He calls it this dense dark dot in the Ashtakam. So this is in a way, it's like the slide or the object that the light of the self gets projected and distorted through. These are all your pending desires, and it creates a world. And he said it also creates a God who looks after that world, and simultaneously it makes you think that you're the observer of that world. So it brings into existence a manufactured world scripted by, composed of all of your pending vasanas from previous lives. So imagine the equivalent, you've got this plug in the wall and there's a wire going into your video game. So you can play the game, you can earn your punyas, get your papams, you can go to different levels. There's a rule, there's a script for the game, there's an overlord in the game who gives you punishments and rewards. You either die or you go up to different levels, but it all takes place in this created realm, in this projected world, in which the Shakti, the electricity from the wall, has gone through a computer program in your machine, and it's created this believable world that you live in, you play in, and it goes on and on and on. There's no end to it. And I think what Bhagavan is saying is that you can play the game, you can move from level to level, but if you're really tired of it, if you've really had enough, just go to the wall and pull the plug out of the wall. If there's no Shakti coming into the machine, if there's no electricity, there's the program inside the machine isn't going to collect any Shakti and project this world for you. He said, this is your option, this is your freedom. You can get stuck in the game, you can go from level to level, samsara, lifetime to lifetime. He said, always remember that there's the equivalent of this plug on the wall. There's an on-off switch. And this on-off switch is getting rid of the I, getting rid of this sense of, I am this person in the body. I do all the things that this body does. I take ownership of all the things inside the body. When that I is eradicated, then no longer is there a projected world that you have to live in and enjoy. And even more importantly, when the body dies, there aren't vasanas that go back into the self and wait for the next time round when the whole show starts all over again. Now, is our day-to-day behavior and action predetermined? Yes, I've answered that. Now, there's one story I want to tell about this. It's a kind of sub-question that's always intrigued me, that we have a script and that Bhagavan says all of these activities are predetermined, but we have the freedom to disassociate from them to the point where you know I am not the body. And I've always wondered, and something Bhagavan never really addressed, is liberation part of our destiny? Or is it something that we can all bring a bit closer if we try harder, if we work harder, if we meditate harder? Can we get it down to 2 lives instead of 22 lives? I don't think he ever addressed this, but going back to his journey to Tiruvannamalai in 1896, he arrived on September 1st, went to the main temple in Tiruvannamalai and stood outside the entrance, at which point, somewhat miraculously, it was locked. The doors were locked and he kind of didn't know what to do. But he said then the doors, huge doors, I mean, you've probably seen them. It's probably the same ones from 120 years ago. They spontaneously opened. So he walked into the first courtyard. Nobody was there. The temple was actually closed. He walked across the first courtyard. He got to the next place where there was normally a locked barrier. And as he went up to it, that door opened as well. And so all the way through to the central shrine, the inner shrine where the lingam was, and he actually hugged the lingam. Now that this was a very, not something he should have done. Even though he was a jnani, you shouldn't really go around hugging temple images. The temple authorities would consider it to be a serious case of pollution, and they'd probably have to close the place down and do a big kumbhabhishekam, or they would consider it a massive example of ritual pollution. Bhagavan didn't care. Because nobody was there, he walked up to the lingam, he stepped over the final barrier, and he hugged the lingam. And he said that from the moment he had his realization experience in Madurai, there was a kind of burning feeling in his body. He didn't know what it was, but he said the moment that he wrapped his arms around that lingam in Tiruvannamalai, it was as if the energy was grounded. He said it went away. So this was the physical reunion, if you like. In Madurai, his eye had gone back to its source, the self, and disappeared. That was the spiritual end of his journey, but there was a physical component to it. He went to Tiruvannamalai, turned up, all the doors opened, he walked through the temple and hugged the lingam. And then there was this final definitive grounding of this residual energy. And I don't think he ever went into the inner shrine again. Now, why is this important? I think it's because in my mind, first of all, I know that this isn't written in any of the books. So I got little hints of this from old devotees who were very hush hush, don't tell anybody. But Kanji Swami, I think, was the first person to blow the whistle on this version. In the pictorial biography that came out in 1980, he mentioned that Bhagavan had stepped over the final barrier and hugged the lingam. Devaraji Mudalia gave a talk at the Chennai Ramana Kendra in the early 70s, and he talked about the doors mysteriously opening one by one. So I mentioned this to Ramanashram, and they weren't quite sure. They'd also heard little rumors about this, and that they wanted to track them down and see what had actually happened. So they sent a letter to V. Ganeshan, who was living up the road from Ramanashram, and they asked about this. And he wrote back and confirmed it. And he said, Bhagavan told this version of events to several devotees, Maragana, Viswanatha Swami, Devaraja Mudalya, but with a kind of rider, don't publish this, the people in the temple won't like it. I think he still felt, I won't say he felt guilt, Jnanis don't feel guilt, but I think that he didn't want to put them to any inconvenience. He didn't want them to somehow think they've been neglecting their duties in allowing an outsider to come in and touch their lingam. So I think he just decided that this was something that was better off not going in the books. And I think Bhagavan also didn't like sensational stories to be about himself. He recoiled from anything sensational, miraculous being added to his biography. And this was a real whopper. This is temple doors spontaneously opening, walking through a temple that he had all to himself, hugging the lingam. So Devaraja Mudalya, who was one of the people who had been told this story, but unofficially said, don't spread it around, the people in the temple won't like it. So he was very curious. He was a lawyer, had an inquiring mind. So he went to the executive office of the Arunachalaswara temple and said, what was going on September the 1st, 1896? I've been coming to Tiruvannamalai since 1904. I've never ever turned up at the front Gopuram and had it closed. It's been open every day I've turned up. Why was your temple closed on 1st September 1896? So they very kindly looked into their old records, and they discovered that there was a once in a generation one-day closing of the temple, and that on that day, all of the ornaments, the jewelry of all the gods inside the temple were taken off the images and given to a group of people who had hereditary rights to clean all the temple jewelry. It took a whole day, and of course you can't do the temple rituals, do the various pujas if the gods are not dressed and attired properly. So for this one day, it used to come up every 20 or 30 years. The temple was closed and nobody was allowed in. Now, when I heard this, I'm not a conspiracy theorist on the whole, but I thought this, to me, looks like Arunachala had arranged for Bhagavan to show up on this particular date, September 1st, 1896. This was the only date within decades of either side of this date when he could have turned up at the front gate, walked through a completely open temple, and finished his business with Arunachala physically by hugging the lingam in the inner sanctum. So then I thought, well, if you start backtracking from that moment, he had to show up on September 1st, 1896, which meant he had to have realized the self, sometime before that to make the journey to go into the temple to hug the lingam. And so you can rewind this story backwards. So I'm absolutely convinced, but I know other people won't agree. I think Bhagavan was destined to realize the self, possibly not on the exact day he did in July 1896, but he was born in Tamil Nadu within commuting range of Arunachala, 1879. I think somehow his bond, his connection with Arunachala immediately became manifest as a small boy. That energy, that power inside him purified him, whittled away his already very attenuated ego. And at the age of 16, it destroyed him. And then a few weeks later, it arranged a very convoluted trip to Tiruvannamalai. He wasn't allowed to show up on the day before or the day after. He was only allowed to show up on September 1st, 1896. So all his various attempts to get there sooner were destined to fail, because I think he had an appointment with Arunachalaswara on the morning of September 9th. So that's why he looked at a map which didn't have a correct railway map on. All the various zigzags were somehow part of the script, and they were all pointing to showing up outside that gate at whatever it was, 10:30 in the morning on the 1st of September, because that was his destined appointment with Arunachala, his guru, his God. It's a lot of conjecture to hang on to some very, very basic facts, but I'm absolutely convinced that Bhagavan somehow had a destiny to have his final incarnation in Tamil Nadu around the time when that would give him enough time to grow up, feel the power of Arunachala, fall in love with it, undertake self-inquiry, realize the self, have a little period of stabilization at home, and then get on his train and show up at Tiruvannamalai at exactly the right moment. So that's my story on that. Take it or leave it. That's my next page. How much time have we got? It's 8:40. I've only been given an hour for this. I've already done 55 minutes. Should I carry on? Does anyone have any questions?
You may please carry on, Mr. Godman.
Oh, sorry. How much are you giving me? Because I saw you have bhajan, you have a program after me. I don't want to eat into your program.
I think you can take about 10 odd minutes.
Okay, thank you. Praying for mukti, freedom from the cycle of birth and death, seems selfish compared to serving mankind. Even Lord Vishnu incarnated repeatedly to help mankind. Should human beings not aim instead to become better equipped to serve? I think it's fine to pray for mukti. Bhagavan, interestingly, once said the difference between a jnani and an avatar. He said an avatar has business in the world. He comes into this world with a job to do. All the stories we know of avatars, there's usually a demon on the loose, or there's some wrong that needs to be righted, so that they come in with business to transact. Bhagavan said jnanis have no duties, no business, no obligations at all, and that's the difference between a jnani and avatar. He also said that realizing the self is the greatest benefit you can give to the world. He said the self in the heart of all beings. If you're a jnani, then you're active in the heart of all beings and you're helping them equally in an egalitarian way at source. You're not looking outwards and saying, I must help this person, I must not help that person. You're not choosing and deciding who to help. Your very existence, your presence in this world is a massive benefit to all beings in this world, more so than if you dedicate your life to trying to correct whatever wrongs that you see in front of you. Bhagavan was asked about this quite often by Gandhians who wanted to justify their particular path. And he said it's a question of attitude. He would tell all the people who came, who wanted to help, that it's Ishwara's job to look after the world. It is most austere. He would tell them off. He said, your job is to become one with Ishwara. It's Ishwara's job to run the world. Don't mix up the two. Your primary duty, your primary obligation is to realize the self. Let him run the world. He can do a much better job of it than you can. You have been born into this world to become one with the world. Don't dissipate your energy by trying to tell God how to do a better job of running the world. Also, he said, you're back to the dream analogy. He said, if you're in the dream and you I can't bear the sight of these suffering people in my dream, I will go out and help them. He said, that's fine if that's a decision you want to take, but recognize that you're giving dream food to dream people. He said the alternative is to wake up. When you wake up from the dream, there the people who are suffering, the people who are serving them, that they all seek to exist from the standpoint of the self. It's not selfish. Selfishness is choosing, I will help this person, I will not help that person. You make a conscious decision to discriminate who you direct your benevolence towards. realizing the self puts you in a place, in a state where simply by being alive on planet Earth, you're doing more for the world than anybody else, no matter how hard they work or how many worldly problems they appear to solve. That might have been a little bit contentious to the people who came to see him, but Bhagavan was quite adamant that realizing the self was the greatest benefit. But he didn't encourage, or rather he didn't criticize people who felt a strong urge to help someone around him. He just said, don't forget the reason for which you've incarnated. It's to realize the self. If you see suffering in your immediate vicinity, then by all means do something about it, but don't turn into a professional do-gooder. Don't run around trying to right all the wrongs of the world, because you'll forget the reason why you're here and you won't have time to go back to the source and merge with it. I think this is quite clear from my example. This is the way he lived his own life. If he saw an injured dog, an injured squirrel, somebody who was suffering in his immediate vicinity, he would say, please give this person some food, they're hungry, or he would take an animal into the old hall and look after it. In his immediate orbit, if help was needed, he spontaneously provided it, but he didn't run around the world looking for people to improve. There's another interesting quote. I think Bhagavan, somebody asked Bhagavan, do you feel compassion for all the suffering of the people around you? And rather surprisingly, he said, no, not at all. And when the questioner was a little bit shocked at this, thought this was a very unfeeling answer, but Bhagavan said, anyone who thinks there is someone different from himself who needs help is not a jnani. He said, there is nothing other than the self, and to make a distinction between myself and something that's other than me that needs my assistance is not the attitude or the perspective of a jnani. He said, if you discover that state for yourself, you will also discover that there is a power looking after the world, and that power attends to all the things that need to be doing in that world. It's not your responsibility, it's not your business, it never was. Abide as the self, and the healing power of that self-abidance will actually benefit the world. You won't have to go out and do anything yourself. There is, I will just conclude with this one story. I think Lakshman Sharma told this story, or he heard it in the old hall. There's a bodhisattva vow in Mahayana Buddhism, and you take a vow that you're not going to get enlightened until everybody else in the world has got enlightened first. You're not going to selfishly claim liberation. You're going to use your spiritual maturity or the punyas from your meditation to uplift other people. And you've decided that you're going to be last in the line for liberation. So this is one of the aspects of the Mahayana Bodhisattva view. And this was explained to Bhagavan once in the hall. And when he got the implications of this, he just roared with laughter and said, that's like saying, I'm not going to wake up until everybody else in my dream has woken up first. So there's, from the perspective of the self, awakening to self solves the problem of the world. It solves the problem of your suffering. It solves the problem of perceiving suffering in other people. And it also gives access to a gigantic, unlimited fund of love and compassion in the jnani that spontaneously radiates out to everybody else in the world. And that's of immeasurable more value than anything an individual can do through his own choice or his own effort. Thank you.
Mr. Godman, thank you so much. Because of my personal medical situation, I will not be able to speak much, but definitely we will catch up later, and we will, of course, be very happy to receive you next time. I would now request Jayanti Didi to proceed with the bhajans, and then we will conclude with the puja. Neeraji, in case you may want to share something as a matter of thanks to Mr. Godman, you are more than welcome to do so right now.
David, I just felt that, there are things that we don't know. And you have pointed them out so beautifully to us because, the significance of hugging a lingam, the fact that you radiate compassion because of your realization. You really don't have to do very much to be compassionate. These are aspects that, of course, we've read about, but the way you pointed them out is, and reading the writing in between the lines is what you have done for us today, and for that, really, really a big thank you. It's really a privilege to have you, and thank you, David.
I enjoy telling the stories because they make me think about and dwell in Bhagavan while I'm saying them. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You can.
Okay,
Loud and
right.
clear.
Om Ramanaya Namaste. Om Ramanaya Namaste. Om Ramanaya Namaste. Akhila Lokha Guru Ramanaya Namaste. Akhila Lokha Guru Ramanaya Namaste. Surya Koti Prakashaya Namaste. Surya Koti Prakashaya Namaste. Atma Ramaya Namaste. Mauna Ubadeshaya Namaste. Sundara Ramanaya Namaste. Ayagamai Ramanaya Namaste. Bhavabhaya Haranaya Namaste. Venkataramanaya Namaste. Sachidanandaya Namaste. Hamsanandaya Namaste. Nityanandaya Namaste. Shivanandaya Namaste. Narayanandaya Namaste. Shambho Shankara Ramanaya Namaste. 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 Shambho Shankara Ramana Namaste. Sachidananda Ramana Namaste. Nitya Mangala Prasanna Namaste. Nirvikalpa Sukha Bhoga Namaste. Shakti Kundali Sameta Namaste. Sakala Siddhi Paripurna Namaste. Paramahamsa Gurunada Namaste. Pahi परमात्मा नमस्ते ओंकार जप सुप्रीताय नमस्ते ओंकारैक स्वरूपिणे नमस्ते ओंकार पद लक्षताय नमस्ते ओंकार नाद नमो नमस्ते अरुणाद्रिवास नमस्ते आत्म प्रकाश नमस्ते त्रिगुणातीत नमस्ते त्रिभुवननाथ नमस्ते ओम रमणाय नमस्ते रमणाय नमस्ते रमणाय नमस्ते रमणाय नमस्ते रमणाय नमस्ते रमणाय Now we will do the Akshara Ramanamala. Arunachalavarakiyatra Aksharamanamala Shatra Karunakara Ganapatiye Karam Aruni Kapaye Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Menagani Ninai Pavaragate Vedagupaya Arunachala Ayage Sundaram Pol Agamu Niyamute Abhinamahirukom Arunachala Agam Pogondi Tunnaga Gugai Shirayai Amarita Del Kol Arunachala Are Kayanai Ondeyagatridill Akilam Arunachala Ipparita Unnaye Ninai Pittai Iniyar Vidovar Arunachala Indredum Annayin Peridarul Purivol Eduvo Unadarul Arunachala Unaye Machi Odadulatin Merudia Yedupai Arunachala Ochulavida Dunai Kandanangida Ularakai Katarunachala என்னை அழைத்தி போதெனை கலவாவிடில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த ஊரகம் என்னை பிறரிக்க இது உனகழவோ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கழ்வர் அகத்தினில் புகும்போது அகத்தில் நீ இல்லையோ அருணாச்சலா நாம் உன்னை பொழிக்கவர் வருவார் இது அருணாச்சலா பொருள் ஒப்புயர்வில்லோய் உன்னையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா ஔவை பொன்னெனக்குள் அருளை தகனையாடுவதுள் கடல் அருணாச்சலா Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Shiva Arunachala Arunachalam Vali அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே, சூழ்க சுதாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே. வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே, சூழ்க சுதாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே. ஏழுலகம் ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பம் பொங்கவே, ஏழுலகம் ஜீவன் முக்தி இன்பம் பொங்கவே. இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே, இதயமாகும் இறைவனாகி எல்லாம் ஓங்கவே. பாழ்மனம் மகிழ்ந்த வாழ்வு பாழ்பட்டொழிகவே, பாழ்மனம் மகிழ்ந்த வாழ்வு பாழ்பட்டொழிகவே. பரம சச்சிதானந்தாத்மா பால் பொழிகவே, பரம சச்சிதானந்தாத்மா பால் பொழிகவே. வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே, சூழ்க சுதாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே. தட்டிலாத நித்திய ஜீவ தத்துவமூங்கவே, தட்டிலாத நித்திய ஜீவ தத்துவமூங்கவே. தன்மயத்தில் சின்மயம் தழைத்து ஓங்கவே, தன்மயத்தில் சின்மயம் தழைத்து ஓங்கவே. எட்டு திக்கும் அம்சசோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே, எட்டு திக்கும் அம்சசோகம் எதிரொலிக்கவே. எல்லாம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மை வகிக்கவே, எல்லாம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் உண்மை வகிக்கவே. வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே, சூழ்க சுத்தாத்ம சக்தி சூழ்க சூழ்கவே. வாழ்க ஸ்வயம் பிரகாஷ வாழ்க வாழ்கவே, சூழ்க சூழ்க சூழ்கவே. வாழ்க வாழ்கவே, வாழ்க வாழ்கவே.
Jayati.
Narayanji,
Yes, sir. Okay.
please.
Nandayana, Gundayana. Om Bhurvaswah Tasavdarvaniam Bhargo Devasya Dhimani Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Devdavida Prasva Satyam Bhavena Pasundamyam Swaha. Om Pranaya Swaha, Om Avane Swaha, Om Jnanaya Swaha, Om Udane Samane Swaha, Om Brahmane Swaha, Arunachal Suranaya Namaha. Usiram Nevidyam Samarpayami, Madhyam Buddhyam Adhyam Samarpayami,
हाँ बोलो.
Neerajanam Samarpayami, Neerajanantaram Apanam Samarpayami. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. Puji pada समाज पर नागरिक कलियुग दम पुरम समर्पयामि 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 गलती हो जाना. ओम नमो भगवते श्री रमानाथ यो भाव पुष्पम वेद भगवान प्रजावान पद्मान भवति चंद्रमा बाबा पुष्पम पुष्पम पुष्पवान प्रजावान पद्मान भवति ओम तत् ब्रह्मा ओम तत् वायु ओम तत् आत्मा ओम तत् सत्यम ओम तत् सर्वम ओम तत् पुरोर्नमः अंतर्चरति भूते सर्वायां विश्वमूर्ति तम यज्ञ तम वसत्कार तम इंद्र तम रुद्र तम विष्णु तम ब्रह्म तम प्रजापति ओम तदारो भवति परेण नाहं नीतं भुवायं विप्राजते दत्ते देयो विसन्ति वेदांत विज्ञान से विचदाता संन्यास योगा तभी अशुद्ध सत्वा ये ब्रह्मलोके परांत काले परामृतात्मरिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे धरम विभावं परमेश्वरभूतं यत्कुण्डलीकं तत्रावित्तगरमत्कगरं विसोगस् तस्मिन् यतं तद्गतिमादित्यं यो वेदादोक्षरप्रोक्तो वेदादो तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परसमनेश्वरः मन्त्रपुष्पं श्रीरमणमहर्षिः समर्पयामि ॐ तत्सत्कृष्णार्पणमस्तु हरि ओम् हरि ओम् हरि ओम् यानि यानि च पापानि तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति
எடுக்கிறேன்டி இது முடியட்டமே லூசு அப்பல இருந்து சொல்லிட்டு இருக்கல
ओम नमः शिवाय शिवाय ओम नमः शिवाय बंदो कहता है
Hello,
yes sir
I'm Vyas. It was an excellent program today that I heard and saw. Wonderful. Thank you very much for arranging this.
Thank you, sir.
I'm KC Vyas. I normally come along with my daughter Rashmi to your Raman Kendra, Delhi, and this was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hello, may I have email ID of Dr. David Godman?
Not a doctor, plain old mister. I will forward it, yes.
My name is Casey. Shall I give you my email ID, please?
I've corresponded with a couple of people at the Kendra by email. They both have my email address.
The example that you gave about cinematography, I would like to send you a write-up on the topic. And if it is okay with you, I would like to have your email ID. You can read it at convenience and then maybe forward your comments to me.
Yeah, Vyasa, we will send you his email ID through Rashmi.
Okay. You can send to Rashmi and she will give me.
Certainly, certainly.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you everyone for joining in. With this, the satsang comes to a closure. Mr. Godman, once again, thank you so much. Jayanti ji, thank you. Narayan ji, thank you. Neera ji, thank you.
It's all thanks to Ramana. Thanks to Ramana. No individuals.
Adarsh sir, thank you.